welcome to Two Boomer Women. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. I've been talking with Boomer women for almost a decade now. Well, I guess I've been talking to Boomer women all my adult life. Reinventing myself several times along the way, though, but always focused on us, Boomer women. With this incarnation of Two Boomer Women, I'll be interviewing other women who have a message of interest for our demographic. If you want to hear about or learn about something specific, let me know and I'll find someone who understands us to talk about it. There's a contact page at twoboomerwomen.com. If you want to be a guest on Two Boomer Women, bring it on. There's an application form at the website too. Finally, this show is all about conversation. We women know its value. We know how to do it, and we must perpetuate the art form. So let's get started with today's show. Welcome to the Two Boomer Women podcast. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. On several occasions, I have mentioned a podcast guest host platform I belong to. If either entity finds a suitable match, they do the research and send out an invite. And that's how I met today's guest. Given the fact that the platform is global, I find it rather fun to find out a person you're about to meet lives only kilometers from you. Today's guest lives about 75 kilometers from me, not far at all in the scheme of things. Kathy has practiced yoga for many years. Back in the 80s, when I was leading high-intensity aerobics classes and loving it, Kathy was not so enamored, preferring cycling, swimming, and yoga. And I will emphasize here, there is no competition between modalities. It's usually about personality and results and other things. I'm going to let her tell her own story, but like so many of us, once Kathy was in her 50s, a few aches and pains moved in, and her traditional yoga wasn't working in the same way. And we're going to find out more. Kathy White, welcome to the Two Boomer Women podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Agnes, for having me on. It's a delight. And as you say, just super to be local, almost neighbors in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and just a short drive to have coffee together one day.
Exactly. Let's do that. Let's do that.
Kathy, I skimmed over the beginning of your yoga journey, but can you tell us how you found yoga and how it suited you so much better than my aerobics classes?
Okay. Yeah, how I found yoga. Well, actually, it was in the 80s. I was tree planting. I was actually here in British Columbia. I was tree planting out east in Ontario. I had an accident and I couldn't continue on with the tree planting. So I came out here. I had a friend, and then I ended up in Victoria, actually. And this friend I was staying with said, "Why don't you come to this yoga class?" And I thought, I'll give it a try. You know, my shoulder's sore still from this injury that I'd got. I'll give it a try. And I went and I was like, what was that? That was amazing. I want more of that. And so my lifelong love, I was in my 20s at the time. That was my lifelong love. And, you know, as you say, in the 80s, aerobics was the big thing. You know, we all wore those leg warmers and I went to these fast bouncy classes, and I tried that because all my friends were going, and I just felt hot, sweaty, and a great big lump. I just didn't. And it's funny because I love to dance, but aerobics just didn't do it for me. And I think I've always been interested in meditation. And I ended up living for 23 years. I lived in a spiritual community in the northeast of Scotland called Findhorn, where I met my husband, where we raised our 2 kids before moving to Canada. And so to find a physical activity that actually combined a spiritual practice was just completely right up my alley. That just fit my interests and my personality perfectly. So that was what yoga did for me.
That sounds like we may have followed parallel paths insofar as you got involved, you loved it, and then you became an instructor. Is that correct?
That's right. In 2000, I went to what I called yoga boot camp. It was an ashram it was in the Bahamas. It was actually quite funny, Agnes, because we were in this very, spiritual very Indian styled. I mean, even though it was in the Bahamas, they styled it very much on the Indian. We were getting up at 4 a.m. to start puja at 5 a.m., doing the chants, we had yoga philosophy. We were reading the Bhagavad Gita. Everything was very, very Indian, but it was in the Bahamas, and next door to where the ashram was Club Med. And so
they're very similar.
There we are doing our chants and finishing up at 8 o'clock, because we were all, up at 4 at 8 o'clock in the evening, right? Time for bed. And we go to our little cabins and try and sleep. And there's Livin' La Viva Loca blasting out the Club Med disco scene right next door. It was this juxtaposition of East and West. It was absolutely hilarious. And we all, those of us who were kind of that way inclined kind of found ourselves, visiting Club Med and going and having a drink in their bar, even though we were not meant to be drinking alcohol or whatever, just for a little break from this relentless, month long. But it was incredible. It was a really, really deep dive into the yoga philosophy, the yoga thing, and the hatha yoga practice, which was then the foundation of my work.
I'm going to go sideways for just a second here and say this is one of the times I really wish that we were filming video as you were living your Vida Loca.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that was a good video moment.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. Okay, so I've forgotten already. Were you already living then on Vancouver Island?
No. I only moved to Vancouver Island in 2018. Actually. Oh,
okay. So you went
back. That time I was in Scotland, living in Findhorn, and the spiritual community of Findhorn, and took off for this month. Did the yoga teacher training, came back, started teaching in Findhorn. There were only a couple of us teaching yoga at the time. It was still, it's kind of interesting now because yoga is so everywhere. Every street corner in every city, in every major city of the world has a yoga studio. It's hard to go back to those days where people were teaching in their living rooms. They were teaching, just quietly in, maybe in a church hall or a gym, which still exists, but it wasn't, it wasn't taught in the same, it wasn't known in the same way that it is today. So I just quietly started teaching yoga, and then my practice evolved. I came across a beautiful methodology called Scaravelli, which there's an amazing, one of the best yoga books. I think if your listeners are ever interested in reading a book about yoga, I would suggest read Awakening the Spine by Vanda Scaravelli. Now, Scaravelli trained directly. She used to have one-to-one sessions with Mr. Iyengar from India. And Iyengar was one of the leading voices of leading teachers, masters who brought yoga to the West. But Scaravelli kind of took his work and just changed it, made it more internal, I think, for me. So that was for many, many years where my focus was. And then I hit the menopause years and everything just went upside down and my joints started aching. And Agnes, it was so embarrassing because there I was, this yoga teacher who, I'm meant to be all limber and, get on my mat and everything else. And I'm just going, this hurts. I don't want to do this. This is aching. It's get out of bed in the morning and I'm kind of hobbling around, just feeling really stiff. And it's like, this can't be right.
Well, and did you talk to other yoga practitioners or yoga instructors? I kind of talked to my yoga teacher at the time, just saying, my knee's hurting, or I got a sore back at the moment. And she was lovely and really, really beautiful woman. And she would kind of give me different poses to kind of work with it, or things to think about, which it was kind of like that. What's that Einstein quote that goes, you can't solve the problem with the same thinking that created it. You can't approach the body in the same way that you've always been approaching the body and expect different results. As a sign of insanity. And so I knew something had to be different, but I just couldn't
couldn't kind of find it. And I went through a period of sort of despairing about this. And I kind of almost gave up yoga really for about a year or so. I mean, I got on my mat, but I didn't teach. And I was just, we're coming to the end of this. I'm too old for this. All those thoughts that.
Which is the last thing you want to admit to.
I know. And I just want to sort of track back a bit and just, this is, kind of vulnerable for me to say, but I think it's kind of key because yoga had been a crucial part of my life's journey and work. And when I was 32, I had a stillbirth. And yoga had brought me back into my body after the trauma of having this emergency C-section, this baby dying, I didn't live in my body for several weeks afterwards. I was just somewhere else. I was full of grief. And I couldn't imagine giving birth to more other children. It was just, and that disassociation with my body and my physicality and my reproductive system and the trauma of grief and loss and everything else, yoga brought me back. Yoga healed me. So when I jumped to that story of being 50 and losing track of what yoga was, it wasn't just losing track of, and it wasn't working for me. It was heartbreaking because yoga had been my healer, my go-to place. This was my solace, my rock, my steady, I'd get on my mat and I'd work things out, both emotionally, physically, and mentally. And so, I just add that story in just to give the kind of the big picture of why it was a real crisis point in my 50s when I discovered, when I couldn't practice anymore, or it wasn't working for me anymore.
And don't for a second think that I'm making light of it, but it would almost be like having your own on-call live-in therapist, really effective therapist, who you suddenly had to close the door on.
Yeah. No, that's a really good analogy of it. And so I kind of slowed down. I didn't teach. I stopped teaching. We were also as a family, we were going through this transition period of thinking about moving. The idea of going to Canada was coming up. My mother's Canadian, so that's why I have Canadian citizenship, although I sound very British. So and my husband had a previous life in Canada too. He'd worked in the oil industry in Calgary years ago. So he also had a connection, although he's British. We'd met in Scotland. We had this Canadian connection and we're thinking about moving. And so we did a 3-month, we went to Hawaii for a holiday and we did a 3-month kind of recce tour through Canada of like, okay, if we were to move to Canada, where would we go? And we went from city to city. We visited relatives and friends. And I threw myself back into yoga, but as a student and just with a kind of wild abandon, really. I was like, okay, let's get back to yoga. And I don't care. I don't care if it's Iyengar. I don't care if it's Bikram, if it's hot yoga, slow yoga, restorative yoga, yin yoga. I don't care. I'm just going to go for it. And because we were traveling, I had all sorts. I just like, as soon as we arrived in the place, I'd say, where's your local yoga studio? Where can I go? And I would sign up. I didn't care where it was, just the nearest thing. And I didn't care what teacher it was. I just wild abandon. I became a bit of a yoga junkie. And that was really, really good period of my life because I kind of threw out all the kind of this works, this doesn't work, that, the rigidity that is kind of ironically can grow up in a yoga teacher because you become disciplined to one particular vein of yoga. You become disciplined to your teacher, your lineage, your practice, which is a very good thing. Don't get me wrong. But there can be a bit of a preciousness about that and a lack of curiosity to what other modalities or things might be offering, right? And unbeknownst to me, I'd kind of fallen into that pattern. And so this period was like, whoa, throw it all out. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if this is the right segue, but when reading your notes or your website or something, I came across the word, and correct me if I don't pronounce it correctly, Kayut.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was when the Kayut influence came in, was in my exploration period of like trying every kind of yoga they could. I even all the YouTube yoga too. If I couldn't find a yoga studio, I just put on YouTube. It's like, whatever. And, just to say to your listeners, YouTube yoga is wonderful. It's amazing. It's such a great free resource. And I really recommend working with a teacher. Find a teacher who you trust, you love, you respect, because that relationship you can't get through YouTube yoga. So, I mean, it's brilliant. It has its place. It's wonderful to get you on your mat and moving and everything, but yoga tends to become a bit of a fitness thing, and you lose that relationship thing. The relationship thing, that doesn't sound very eloquent, but that relationship piece of it, that deep connection that you have to yourself and to your teacher as well, that is really important to grow up. But yeah, in that time, coming back to Kayut, I found this teacher in Brazil, Francisco Kayut, through various kind of avenues and ways, because it's not widely known at all. And then before I knew it, I'd signed up to do a teacher training with him that was starting. I discovered it in the July, and by August, by the next month, I'd signed up, and in September, I was over in Toronto doing a 3-module training over a year and a half. And so I went for 10 days, 12 days, and 14 days over 18 months, doing this really intense revisioning of my whole practice. And then not forgetting my lineage, not forgetting the Hatha yoga roots, not forgetting the Scaravelli influence. I then put it together and created what I call now the Joint Renewal System.
So what was different about Kayut?
What was different about it was the understanding of how to approach restrictions in the body. You'll often hear, and I have to be mindful about this, because listeners are going to go back to their yoga class and go, it's all right. I heard this yoga teacher say it's okay to be in pain when you practice yoga. It's like, not quite. Yes. And in the right pose, with incredible safety and knowledge of what you're doing, to go into a pose, and the poses in Kayut are broken down to, we're going to like the foundations. So what happens in yoga is that people tend to, without laying the foundations in their body and discovering what their body can or can't do joint by joint, they're suddenly doing headstands, or they're suddenly doing back bends, or they're suddenly doing these fancy yoga poses, which are far too complex for the average Western body, especially as it ages. So Kayut, A, breaks things down to its basic components, and then B, allows you safely to approach a restriction. So say you have a hip restriction, and that hip is in 10 years going to need a replacement. If you can actually access that hip joint in the variety of different ways that it's designed to be accessed, because we tend to sit or walk. Well, there's 2 positions for the hip. The hip is a ball joint. There's 360 positions for the hip. Which ones are we missing? So the yoga is an approach. The joint renewal yoga is an approach to try and find that variety, try and find it slowly, and to be willing to experience the discomfort that may be there in the restriction. Because unless you touch the discomfort, you're never going to be able to dissolve it. You'll always be working around and avoiding it. And eventually you run out of compensatory patterns and you need a stick or a cane. You need a walker. And that's why we see aging in the body. And that's the usual trajectory of aging. But actually, if the joints are kept mobile and moving, that possibility becomes a really live, strong possibility that you won't need those props as you age, because you're going to keep the mobility of the joints alive.
I have so many questions right now. Okay, so you're bouncing around Canada with wild abandon. Were you still experiencing certain pains and aches in some of the different classes that you were in?
Yeah. And, those aches and pains I was just kind of like, well, gotta live with them. I might as well just carry on, I'll do this yoga and stuff. And I wasn't sort of sticking at any one practice enough to explore them in any which way. If they were really bad, if it was really sore back one day, I'd take a painkiller. I'd do that kind of thing. And I think because I was on holiday, as it were, a break from my normal life and everything, I think, and we started the whole trip with this weeks in Hawaii. That really helps, the sea, the sand, the sunshine. I think my body was just feeling a little lighter anyway. So it wasn't so acute at that time.
Okay. And was it at one of those classes that you were introduced to Kayut?
No. How I found the Kayut was actually I was on a spiritual retreat and they offered yoga in the mornings. And the teacher who was teaching the yoga gave us this really amazing mindful yoga class. And she said, I've worked with Francisco Kayut. And I was like, okay, who's he? Got to find out more, and discovered more about it.
Okay, so somewhere along the way, you did this Kayut immersion, which led you to creating your own trademark system. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, so we're mid-aged women. Listeners are mid-aged women. We have more than a few aches and pains. Some old injuries are coming back to haunt us. How does your practice help when getting down on the floor is hard enough and getting up can be downright embarrassing?
Yeah. I had a student talk to me the other week and I said, can you get up and down? That's always a question I ask if a new student comes in. Can you get up? How are you with getting up and down off the mat? And she goes, well, I can, but it ain't pretty.
Sounds like me.
And what I like to say is that if you still can, even if it takes you time, even if you need a chair by your side to do it, as best you can, keep doing that action. Keep getting up and down off the floor. Keep getting up and down off your mat. If it's really difficult and really impossible, I can teach someone from a chair. So I can have someone sit on a chair and do a class from the chair. And I'm currently doing a chair yoga training with another teacher, Christine Weber, who does a subtle yoga practice. But I think that in Japan, they have, is it Okinawa? There's a place in Japan where routinely they live to 100.
Yeah. Blue zones.
In the blue zones, yeah. And when they studied what do they do, one of the things they found that was very indicative of continuing mobility was they sat on the floor. They continued the Japanese tradition, which unfortunately is moving out of mainstream Japanese culture. More and more Japanese families sit at tables and chairs, but actually the traditional sitting down on the floor to eat, sitting down on the floor to chat with friends, sitting down on the floor for whatever reason, So in the course of a day, a person who doesn't use chairs would be up and down probably 100 times a day. Now that in itself, that's a pretty good workout that you don't even have to plan. So I try and encourage my students. I say, watch telly on the floor, read a book on the floor. If you go for a picnic, don't take those fold up chairs, take a rug, get on the floor, get on the grass, and really encourage people. Just that very action of sitting on a floor or the ground is so, so, so helpful.
As an aside, I still teach a seniors exercise class. Now, when I say seniors, I mean seniors because I started teaching this class 30 years ago, and some of those women are still in the class. So they are in their 90s. And we do actually talk about hip flexibility and that because of balance. But one thing I do demonstrate relatively regularly is if you have the fall, here's how you get back up. Mm-hmm. So, it's one of those, you use the chair and all, the routine.
Yeah.
But I find more and more for myself is like, that's how I'm getting up. It's not pretty. And I'm probably looking more and more like those 90-year-old women in my class.
Yeah. And, for me, Agnes, that ability, the idea that we would lose that is as much a mental game as it is a physical game, because if you mentally tell yourself, no, I don't have to lose this. I just need to practice doing it. I just don't practice getting up and down the floor enough. Yeah. Then there's a positivity and there's a willingness to keep trying and keep rejuvenating and keep actively engaged with that motion. But if the mind says, oh no, I'm too old, I can't do it, I won't do it, it's not pretty, and so therefore I won't do it. It's not pretty, who cares?
Yeah, no, exactly. I love making people laugh.
Exactly. Let's be ungainly here. We don't all have to be these yoga bunnies. And that's a real problem for many people. How many times, I wish I had $1 for every time someone has told me, Kathy, I can't do yoga, I'm not flexible. And that is such a shame that yoga and flexibility have been linked, like you have to be flexible in order to do the yoga. No. The whole reason you want to do yoga is not about flexibility. Flexibility is maybe a byproduct and maybe not. It depends on your body, your genes, what you eat, all the rest of it. But I want healthy joints. Absolutely. I want to do yoga because I want healthy joints. There we go. It doesn't matter how flexible you are. All it means is that each joint can move to its optimal level. So yeah, it's a different approach.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the yoga bunnies because over the years, I tried yoga a number of times, like in classes, and the instructor would call out a pose, and I'm going, I have no idea what that is, so then I'm trying to look at what other people are doing, and so I finally quit because I don't like being the apparent klutz, and apparently the only klutz in the class. So it's just like, I don't know what these words mean or what these poses are, so I just quit going. Where is your practice around that? Like, is it just more about this is what we do within our body? Like, or do you call it?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll say, okay, let's come into Sukhasana, and I see all these blank faces. It's like, okay, Sukhasana is an easy pose. It's just a simple cross-leg pose. We're going to cross our right leg in front of our left, and it's a nice open cross. So have your left shin, the inside shin, just have that a little further away from you and cross your right over that. And then just see if you can move your feet a little bit further towards the sides of the mat. And just sitting on your bolster as you're in that position, or your cushion, if you're at home, and just breathe into your spine, sit up, maybe close your eyes if you're comfortable with that. And that would be, so yes, I've used the word Sukhasana, but it doesn't matter whether people have registered that word or not, because I've talked you through how to get into the pose. I've talked you through, body parts. Hopefully everybody knows where their shin is and everybody knows where their feet are. I mean, when I was doing my training, one of the big beefs I had with my teacher was, I don't know those body parts you're talking about, the tibia. Which one is it? I've forgotten. Can you not just say forearm, or can't you just say, your wrist, or things that we all know, head, shoulder, knees, and toes, that kind of language. And I think that that's important for us as yoga teachers. I mean, that was many years ago, and I do have a little bit more anatomy now, but I think as yoga teachers, that's really to go back to being the beginner's mind, not overwhelm our students with language. That can be such a barrier in any profession. When something becomes jargon, it separates. And the whole idea of yoga is connection, connection to yourself, yourself to yourself, yourself to your spirit, yourself to your breath, yourself to others, yourself to your teacher, all of that connecting. If there's anything that separates, like language, that you kind of go, what? What's that mean? It's not going to work. It's not a service. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can identify with that because a big part of our fitness training was anatomy and, muscles and joints and bones and stuff like that. And, it's so easy to want to appear smart, I suppose, by using the big words. But if you're leaving your class behind, then you're not accomplishing anything.
Exactly. Yeah, it doesn't help. And I think, one of the things about, health, fitness, whatever, more and more, I just came across some research recently, and there's a lot of work, for example, about breathing at the moment and breath work. And I think on the back of COVID, a lot of us are much more aware of our breathing patterns, and James Nestor's book, Breath. And actually, the data, the research really says mindful breathing is all you need. So it doesn't matter the pattern, whether you're doing this box breath, whether you're doing the sprayer breath, whether you're holding your breath, whether you're doing fast breathing, slow breathing, The fact that you're aware that you're breathing is what matters. And I would imagine, I haven't got any data on this, but I'm just conjecturing that I imagine it's the same thing about fitness and yoga and anything that you do with your body. If you're mindful as you do it, if you're aware that I'm moving my knee, I'm moving my hand, or this is where my neck is, that mindfulness is what helps heal and restore and keep you alive and healthy. That's my theory. So, anyone can.
Everybody knows I come with notes, and I think you've just buzzed through about eight things. Because I was going to say that, I think with traditional yoga, it's as much about the mind as the body.
Yeah.
And then in one of your videos, you talked about feeling your breath, thinking about how you're breathing and your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what you've just tied all that together now.
Yeah. Because, when we're panicked, the breath changes. When we're deeply relaxed, the breath changes. When we're excited about something, the breath changes. And so being aware of the breath can actually help people notice, because they might, how you say someone, they're clearly upset or something, you go, how are you? And they go, fine. If they have the awareness of the breath, they would realize that actually there was something that was a little excited in that moment, that their breath was different and changed. And maybe they still were fine, but they were in a different state. So it's not to say we can name people, call them out on how they're feeling. Well, of course, we don't know how anyone is feeling at any particular moment, but for us ourselves to check in with ourselves, how's my breathing? And it just is a barometer of how we are.
Well, I know too, I tell my class, and I think about it myself often, is if there's any stress in your life, whether it's even just, you've been cut off in traffic or you're worried about something, if you take that deep breath in and then exhale it as far out as you can, it's really hard at the end of that breath to talk like this because, or to keep your shoulders up around your ears. It's really hard. So It's just a way of like letting it out, letting it go.
Yeah. And all of that time that you're doing that deep breath in and then let it all out, you're very present. Yeah. You're conscious. You're aware. You're awake. You're in that moment. You're not worried about what the car just did in terms of cutting you off. You've actually brought yourself back to it's now. That happened just then, and now I'm okay. Yeah.
In another video, you mentioned grandchildren. And I understand that joints are an important part of enjoying your grandchildren. So is strength. Like, heaven forbid that we can't pick the baby up. Does your system address that as well?
Oh, for sure. The strength building component of it is we have to apply pressure to joints. Joints actually need pressure for good health. And so we do that through gravity. So we might do a leg lift. We might hold that leg in the air, but we're extending the knee, we're flexing the foot, so we're getting into the ankle, we're feeling the weight of the leg into the hip joint, we're keeping the pelvis stable, and we keep on holding that. We hold it for maybe a minute, sometimes 2 minutes. I'll have my students hold. Of course, giving them the option, like, if your leg starts shaking and you're like struggling here, please bend your knee and place your foot back down on the ground. But my longer term students, they can absolutely hold that, and for longer even. And that's strength. That really builds strength. We're not deliberately saying, let's build strength in this leg, but I teach at our local municipal pool. Teach a yoga class there, and we had a CPD day yesterday, continuing professional development, and we all had to do a spin class. Well, I've never done a spin class. I got, one of those bicycles where you pedal like a little hamster in a wheel, and so we're all doing this and everything. So I was like, oh my God, my legs are going to be killing me tomorrow. They're going to be really, really suffering, because I was just going for it. And I like to cycle anyway. I have an e-bike and I cycle outside, but it was far, far more than I would normally push myself, because there's a little competition going on and the other teachers in the room. And anyway, we got off the bikes and I was expecting the next day to be suffering, and I wasn't. I was like, oh, I have that strength in my thighs. I have that strength in my legs to cope with that hour of pretty intense cycling, which I hadn't ever tested. But of course it's there, because I've been practicing yoga pretty much every day with this method of joint renewal for 5 years now. Yeah.
So is this where we work our way into WD-40 for the joints?
Yes.
I love that. I have a really big can of WD-40 in my workshop. So I love that analogy.
Yeah, I mean, it just gives a little different kind of take on WD-40 for the joints. Everyone can make that image and go, yeah, that's what I need. And especially as you age, where do we feel our age most acutely is in the joints. And as you say, people have old injuries that start to come back. I had a student once that last year who came to me and said, I'm due for a hip replacement, and can we just do a one-on-one session? And I kind of looked at her alignment and and then I got her to stand and I got her to move her ankles. And then I just said, okay, what's going on in your ankles? Let's just have a look. And we looked and we played around with it and we did some poses. And then I had her stand again. And I said, did something ever happen in your ankle? And she said, oh, yeah, well, when I was younger, when I used to play hockey for school or competitively or something, and I had a really bad accident and broke my ankle and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I haven't thought about it for years. But I could see, just from years of looking at human bodies and training, and especially the joints and the alignments, I could see that ankle, that was the reason she was having a hip replacement all those years later. The referred compensatory pattern that built up in her ankle, her knee, and therefore her hip. It was her hip that was now suffering. So to try and get into the joints, and work them and WD-40 them to lubricate them so those stiff ankles are really addressed, so that possibly you can even avoid going for surgery. Because even surgeons themselves say, if you could avoid it, it would be better. A natural bone is going to be better than an artificial one. Hips, just getting into those joints in a way, like I said earlier, the variety of movements that is available in the joint is lost for so many people, and we want to regain that. And we need to, apply the WD-40. We need to apply the variety, the pressure, the systematic working through each joint in different angles, holding the poses for long enough that you can explore what's going on inside a joint, and being willing to face the discomfort rather than avoid it. And because it's, as I said earlier, it's done safely, then it's really possible to approach those restrictions carefully with kindness. We're not pushing into it. We're not forcing anything. We're not pulling. We're not doing traction. We're just kindly investigating, putting pressure, using gravity, and waiting. We'll stay in a pose for 3 minutes and just wait and see. And actually things start to dissolve through that, applying the pressure, breathing of their own accord. And the other big thing that I must say is healing in the body happens when the body is relaxed. We do not heal when our parasympathetic system is awakened. So if we're in fight or flight, which also includes running in the gym, which also includes lifting weights, which also includes aerobic classes, we're actually in adrenaline mode. We're pushing. And so, yes, you may build muscles and you may improve your heart rate and everything else, but nothing is restoring itself in those modes. Nothing is healing in those modes. The body needs rest, and it needs to be in parasympathetic mode. The nervous system has to be in rest and digest mode in order to restore and heal. So yoga is this unique opportunity where you are actually moving very slowly, very mindfully, hopefully, moving your body and finding those restrictions, and you're calming your nervous system at the same time. So as you find the restriction, the opportunity, the nervous system is relaxed enough that the body can do its repair, its restore, its healing in the moment as well.
Many years ago, I knew a woman who she was a dancer. She'd had a really bad back injury, which because of the injury, she ended up doing back therapies, like teaching and leading back care and all that stuff. And I remember her at one point in time saying, when you have pain or aches, if you really think about taking that breath in, be relaxed and take the breath in, and just imagine that you're sending it right to that place and holding it and then exhaling again. Is that
That's very much along the same lines of how I teach. Yeah, you got it. And that's awareness, it's oxygenation. So on a physiological level, you're oxygenating the joints. It's awareness and it's calming the nervous system. So the body itself is more in its rest and digest, heal and restore mode.
When you mentioned about the woman who had the broken ankle many years ago, I don't know if you ever heard the song, and I think it was back in the 60s, like the hip bone's connected to the thigh bone, that sort of thing. And, it's a goofy song, but it really is true.
It really is true, yeah.
Yeah. I've had a series of accidents, whatever you want to call it, on my right knee. And people will see me walking saying, oh, your knee's so much better. You're not limping at all. And I'm going, well, it's not about whether my knee's that much better. It's just that I know if I really start limping, then my hips are going to go and my ankles change and like that whole alignment changes. And it just,
Exactly.
it is like this little domino system.
And then, and what I've learned from this is that we run out of options eventually. The compensation can go to here and then we can take over from here and then the shoulder can move and we can get here. But then eventually we've knocked all the dominoes over and then there is just stiffness and rigidity left. That we've run out of options. And that's when the body starts to really lock in and lots of chronic pain can occur. So we're really trying to, the WD-40 for the joints is about keeping our options open, that I can move my hips this way, I can move my shoulders that way, that they can still have the variety of movements for which they're designed. I
think I learned that really, really early. And I think I had like a shoulder issue or something. And I went to this physiotherapist who stood behind me and found the pain. And I was, Mm-hmm. And then she said, okay, well, how about over here? Oh, yeah. Well, how about down here? Oh. And then she went over here. Geez. Like, I didn't know I had that many aches and pains. I thought the pain was
in the one place. Yeah.
Yeah. And so because she backtracked it, she worked on the origin and like, all the pain went away.
Yes.
So it really blew me away because you think the pain is where you're feeling a specific pain. And
it's often not. That's just the symptom. It's not the actual cause. And the cause can be, quite far away from where the symptom is showing up.
Okay, I'm going to ask about your system in a second, but our audience are boomer women. What haven't I asked you? What haven't we talked about that you think they should know, they should think about?
Well, I mean, I have touched on this a little bit, but I could just say it a bit more is it's never too late to start. And it's your mindset as much as possible that will prevent you from doing it. And if you can find a practice, wherever you are, find a teacher and don't be afraid to try, kind of like me in my yoga junkie phase, where I was just wild abandon, like searching, because I knew I was looking for something and I had to try lots of different things. When you find the right teacher, when you find the right method for you, and it probably will be slower, more yin, restorative, Kayut, joint renewal system that I teach, in those ways, you'll know. Your body will know. You'll come out of the class that you've gone to and you'll go, yep, this is what I'm looking for. So don't be afraid to keep trying different modes. And as much as possible, try and separate your yoga practice from other fitness things that you do. Like have your yoga practice support your cycling, support your gym class, support your TRX if you like to do that. Whatever it is that you love to do in terms of cardio or fitness, have your yoga as something separate for that because it has a very different purpose and function, and try and separate that. Unfortunately, the yoga field has become inundated with power yoga, fitness yoga, workout yoga, and all these kind of things. And I wish they wouldn't call it yoga, because for me, it's much more mindful, spiritual, calming, restorative. And that's where I would like to personally keep it in that realm and keep it in people's minds in that realm. But just have the attitude, you can do this. No matter how stiff, no matter how many replacements, how many injuries, how much you feel stuck to your couch or your chair, you can do it. You really can.
Okay. Tell us about your joint renewal system and what is the challenge?
Yeah. So the joint renewal system is my yoga. I mean, basically it's getting on your mat and it's working those joints. And I use as my basis 100 class plans that come from the Kayut tradition. And working through those, you'll get to move each joint. You won't burn out joints. You won't be going, okay, my shoulder hurts and I'm going to just work my shoulder and do exercises in my shoulder. No, we'll do shoulders one day and then maybe not touch shoulders for a few days. And then we'll come back to them, and maybe we'll do hips one day and we'll come back to them later, so that the body has this time, this rhythm to come back to different angles that we use. So the whole system is built on variety and an accessibility that's really, really doable. And the challenge, I have a 7-day challenge that comes up once every 2 or 3 months. So I've just done one in August. The next one will probably be in November. But, when people are listening to this, that probably won't make much sense. But if you sign up for my free joint renewal guide, you'll be automatically on my mailing list, and I'll send you details of when the next challenge is coming up. And we go through that in the challenge. We go through 7 days, and I call them the 7 C's. And they include, let me just reveal 3. I try not to reveal all of them, just to keep a little bit of anticipation. But one of them is commitment, another is courage, and another is care. Because you need commitment, you need to show up on your mat. You need courage because, especially as we age, we get a little fearful about our bodies and about moving them. And we need a bit of courage to actually engage. And we need care. We need kindness. We need to look after ourselves as we move. So those are 3 of the 7. There are another 4 to be revealed. So yeah, I'd be delighted if your listeners wanted to join me for my next challenge whenever it comes up. And they come up every 2 or 3 months. They rotate around.
I don't have your website up right at the moment. Was there a 21-day challenge or something?
The 21-day challenge is, that's a paid thing. So my 7-day challenge is free. That's why I'm sharing people, because I think it's really important that you access and find out something without having to put your money down, first of all. So if people wanted to do the 21-day challenge, that for sure, it's on sale at the moment for $47. It's usually $97. So.
Yeah, I think I saw that and I thought, okay, I'm going to talk to this woman and then go sign up for this challenge because it sounds right up my alley. Ah, dear. So the challenges and stuff, does that just get us so enthused and just good enough that we want a full membership?
I think so. I mean, that's the idea is, and obviously horses for courses, you've got to find what works for you. You've got to love what you do. I mean, obviously I'm absolutely passionate about this methodology and how I teach it. And it's not going to be for everyone. I think it should be for everyone, but that's me just going, everyone needs this yoga. It's like, nah, not really. But come try it. Come and be surprised. Come with an open mind. Come try it and see what you think.
That's great. Where do we find you on the World Wide Web?
On the www, we go to Kathy White Yoga, all one word. And white is like the color. So Kathy White Yoga. And Kathy is with a K. So kathywhiteyoga.com.
And you're on social. I saw some.
Yeah. Kathy White Yoga on Facebook, Twitter. Am I on Twitter? I can't remember. I have a young girl who does my social for me. So that's very helpful. I don't even know where I am, but I'm out there somewhere.
Okay. I'll find your links. Yeah, sorry, I'm reading my notes here. I downloaded your free guide, and I think I also need to join your challenge. Retrieve my knees before they're completely done.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'd love to have you join, Agnes. It'd be a delight. Yeah.
Okay. I always put links in the show notes, so I will look them up. Listeners, if you have comments on today's show, please talk to us. If you're listening at twoboomerwomen.com, scroll to the bottom of the page and leave comments there. We can be found at Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, most places a person would listen to podcasts. Feel free to leave comments there, and please leave stars and reviews. They help us grow. Before you go, hit the subscribe or follow button, and you'll be notified about future interviews with more of my great guests. And share this episode with everyone. I don't think I know a single person over 50 who doesn't have some sort of age-induced limitation. And if you share with the younger folk in your life, then maybe they'll bypass the age-related limitations. Is that possible?
Who knows? I mean, I think there's experiments going on right now with the younger crowd of teachers that I'm involved with. Yeah. I mean, they're just, yeah. And you know what? Life happens. People have car accidents. People fall over. People have skiing accidents and injuries occur, so it's not possible to completely avoid life, but it is possible to approach it and know what to do when those things happen.
Okay, so I will stick with my original comment. Share this episode with everyone.
Everyone, yes.
If you want to be a guest on podcast or know someone who would be a great guest, there's an application form at the website. Kathy White, thank you so much for being my guest on Two Boomer Women today and inspiring us that joint health can be ours again.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here and talk with you today.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, and you too.